here is my friend Pam. Went to college together. She has been actively fighting stage 4 breast cancer for 8 years. No remission. She never got her miracle. She's had 2 mastectomy surgeries, 1 reconstructive surgery, which had to be redone, or actually had to be reversed. Lots of chemo, radiation, which damaged her skin to the point that she now has holes in her skin that bleed every day and have no expectation of ever being healed. When we hear about how her cancer is spread, it's in her lymph nodes, her hips, her spine, her skull, other parts of her bones, and just recently now in her liver, we wonder when the cancer is going to win. We use dark humor to cover up our fear and try not to think too hard about the fact that she's living on borrowed time. Her cancer is in a holding pattern now. No better, no worse. Her treatments are for quality of life, not a cure. As part of her struggle to live with the ever-present reality that her body is trying to kill her, she wrote a letter to cancer, sharing some of the things cancer has done for her, besides increase her wig collection. My friends and I have bonded to the next level, and I learned a whole new meaning of being fiery and standing up for myself. You have given me the chance to see that people will stick around even when you have nothing to give, or when you truly need someone. And you also have enlightened me about the people I thought who had my back, but they just needed to use me. You have also shown me that my faith in God is no longer something that was just taught, but rather digested and accepted. I have never asked, why me? Nor will I now. Even right now, I am fighting the battle of feeling alone and helpless, and I'm on my way to treatment. Each treatment chips away at me, where I need to do rash purchases or an awful lot of damage control to keep up this unending Jedi mind trick necessary to stay afloat in life. But see, this is what you will never get. My desire to laugh and be happy will always overpower everything else. The gift of being able to laugh, even when I just had a fistful of tears, maybe that fact that no matter how much you scar me, God gave me the powerful gift of finding humor. That is my weapon. I don't know what my future is, but I will fight not to lose hope. Not hope for a cure, but more for a chance to still obtain my definition for success. As someone living with cancer, Pam has spent years bringing awareness. She works with Stand Up to Cancer, and she has her own charity, Pink for Pam, where she focuses on those living with cancer as well as their caregivers. Her focus is to help them feel normal with little luxuries in life, like manicures or massages. Is there something going on in your life? Might not be the big C, but are there anger issues? A stressful job? Are you struggling in your marriage? Your singleness? Maybe you are suffering from a health issue, a birth defect. Have you prayed for divine intervention? You think God hears you, but since you're still struggling, you're not sure. I want to encourage you today to tell you that the lack of a miracle is not a lack of faith. Unanswered prayers, sufferings, and struggles in this life are not to be seen as a curse from God, but an opportunity to have the grace and power of God dwell within us, as we will see by exploring the principles presented by Paul regarding his thorn in the flesh in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. Now, before we get to the text, I just want to give you guys a little bit of background. If you take time to read some of his letters in the New Testament, you will come to realize that Paul loved to talk about himself. And he had reason to brag. He was once Saul the Pharisee, a faithful Hebrew, a Benjaminite. He held the coveted honor of being a Roman citizen. He'd done everything to the letter of the law prior to his conversion. And his conversion experience included a personal vision and conversation with Christ. He was proudly single, married to his ministry, and was self-supported, refusing to be paid for his ministry. Much of what we know about Paul, he told us. However, in ancient Mediterranean culture, boasting was viewed extremely negatively. And since Paul loved to talk about himself, it isn't surprising that there were people who didn't like him. His personality was hindering his message, and his apostleship was being questioned. This is one of the reasons that Paul is writing again to Corinth. At the beginning of our chapter, 2 Corinthians 12, Paul told the church that he had experienced visions and revelations given to him by God. So let's pick up his testimony in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. And this is the New American Standard Bible. And because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, to keep me from exalting myself. Concerning this, I entreated the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distress, with persecutions, with difficulties for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I want to spend a little bit of time going over this idea of the thorn of the flesh, this messenger of Satan. Throughout the centuries, there's been much debate over what this actually was. There are about as many theories as there are people to spout them off. Much of tradition says that Paul's thorn was some sort of physical ailment, with poor eyesight being the top contender. But let's do a little bit more looking at it. Because he asked repeatedly for it to be taken from him, it's assumed that Paul's ailment was something that he had for a long time. Something prominent, which caused him considerable embarrassment as well as discomfort and inconvenience. Some have suggested that he had malaria from all of his travels, or even epilepsy. In studies with those with temporal lobe epilepsy, patients experienced feelings of elation, being in another world, and even intense religious experiences. Those with this type of epilepsy manifested an increased concern with philosophical, moral, and religious issues, increased extensive writing on religious and philosophical themes, lengthy letters, diaries, and poetries. Sounds a little bit like Paul, doesn't it? Another option is migraines. It's been said that those with high-achieving personalities, such as Paul, are more likely to be afflicted with migraines. They have historically been considered to be caused by evil spirits or a psychological disorder, so they're often downplayed by those who suffered from them in ancient times. I myself suffer from ocular migraines and can attest to the unnerving auras and fluctuations in vision when one has an episode. And there are those that say that Paul's thorn was more an internal issue than a physical one. He had to constantly defend his authority as an apostle to those who had not questioned him when he first met them. This is exactly what he's doing in our letter to the Corinthians. One scholar in the life of Paul suggests that a continuous source of pain for him was the fact that none of his churches measured up to his expectations. This lack of faithfulness in his converts would certainly keep his pride at bay. And there's another group of scholars who look at the Greek word messenger, angelos, and say that we should be reading it as an angel from Satan, who is this thorn. And when you look at the fact that the term buffet in verse 7 literally means to strike with a fist or to maltreat with violence, it may suggest that demons or outside forces were attacking him. He faced disgruntled individuals just about everywhere he went. He was harshly treated for casting out demons, harassed by idol makers, imprisoned, and physically assaulted repeatedly. In the Old Testament, Israel's undefeated neighbors were called thorns. Therefore, Paul very well could have expected, his use of the word thorn to be recognized as an idiom meaning enemy. But the fact remains that Paul, who loved to talk about himself, breaks from the unexpected by being intentionally vague. By not identifying a specific thorn in the flesh, Paul is deliberately leading his readers away from his own personal experience and pointing them towards the revelation about the meaning of weakness. It is this revelation, not the vision or the thorn, which provides the key to understanding Paul here. It moves us past Paul's experience and explains why he can boast of weakness. We learn about what to do when we are suffering by looking at Paul's own response to this thorn. The temptation is to ask God, why me? However, when faced with what was seen as something that was insurmountable, something from Satan, Paul's first response was prayer. Let's look again at verse 8. Concerning this, I entreated the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. Like Job and Jesus before him, Paul was waiting on an answer from the Lord. Not content with what he perceived as silence from the Lord, Paul asked 3 times for that burden to be lifted. This response is in line with Paul's view of prayer. In other letters, he encourages Christians to pray without ceasing, forego anxiety, and to pray to God for all things. Paul is secure in the knowledge that it is only through God that we are given strength. Only through God is Satan defeated. But when misfortune or calamity comes, we are ready to charge God with neglect or cruelty. If he sees fit to cut up our usefulness in some line, we mourn, not stopping to think that God may be working for our good. We need to learn that chastisement is a part of his great plan, that under the rod of affliction, the Christian may sometimes do more for the master than when engaged in active service. When Paul did get his answer, he was not given what he asked for. Instead of having this affliction removed, the Lord told Paul his grace was sufficient, and it was Paul's weakness that perfected God's power. Paul, ever the zealot and overachiever, could not stay humble under his own willpower. But Paul's inability to overcome his weakness is not a commentary on God's abilities to heal or overcome. Weakness does not negate one's call. Since in his weakness, no one could claim that Paul had the power to make his ministry to the Gentiles effective, the very effectiveness of his ministry showed that the power was God's. The need to rely on God for contentment transcends both time and individual situations. Society speaks of self-sufficiency, but Paul emphasizes the sufficiency of grace. Paul's weakness points to the gospel of Christ and the message of salvation. God's grace is sufficient for any human weakness. By substituting our weakness for the unnamed weakness of Paul, we are able to personally accept the sufficiency of God's grace regarding our individual struggles and disappointments. This sufficiency is not the bare minimum. The Greek word archeo means to be possessed of unfailing strength, to be strong, to be enough, to defend, to ward off. The idea is that God's grace is sufficient for us to bear our burdens to the point that we really don't even have any need to ask for them to be removed. God's answer of my grace is sufficient is a precept that is true for anybody, anywhere, anytime. Divine power is made perfect and brilliantly displayed when human weakness is noticeably evident. It ensures that God is the one receiving the praise and adoration. God has never promised to alter circumstances or release us from trouble. Not getting what you pray for shouldn't be seen as a lack of faith. Would we accuse Jesus of a lack of faith because he didn't get what he asked for in Gethsemane? Inward strength to endure is a far higher manifestation of divine grace than the removal of life's difficulties. When we are going through trials and sicknesses, we are often reminded of the text, "Your faith has made you well." and that we only need to have the faith of an itty-bitty mustard seed. 1 John says, whatever we ask, we will have. Therefore, we question ourselves, or are questioned by others, when healing and relief do not come. Is it a lack of faith on my part? A lack of ability on God's part? These are dangerous claims to make. We need to remember that faithful Paul was not miraculously fixed. Through his thorn, his character was shaped, and he was able to be a witness to those suffering. It is only in our weakness that we can claim God is working in us. We are faulty. The good must come from him. I want to share with you the rest of Tina's story. While she was in remission, she met Neil. They dated, fell in love, got married, and her cancer came back. This time, the prayers, drug trials, doctors, it all fell short. Yet their faith continued to mature. As they neared their 3rd anniversary, just after Tina's 29th birthday, she became bedridden. Neil took care of her every need, feeding her, bathing her, keeping track of all her medications. It was his full-time job. Tina was too sick to give the testimony she wanted to at church about God's goodness through her adversity. She lost the ability to speak as the cancer grew in her brain. She was going downhill fast. Neil was preparing to become a widower at the age of 34. Then, less than 48 hours before Tina passed away, Neil collapsed in front of his parents. At the hospital, he was pronounced dead. It took over a year for the family to learn the cause, an undetected genetic heart condition. Their story of young love and loss made the front page of the Boston Globe, above the fold. News around the world shared their story and their faith. Each one of these stories told of the family's hope in the resurrection and the comfort that comes from knowing that God was in their marriage. Tina's testimony went viral. This last week I was talking to Neil's sister, Jill, who just happens to be my sister-in-law, about the heart test that she and her children, my niece and nephews, are going to soon undertake. She told me how grateful she and her parents were for Tina. Before he met Tina, Neil's relationship with God was limited. He was caught up in the distractions of life. God was an afterthought. Jill and her parents take comfort every day in the fact that it was through Tina's faith and their daily struggles with her cancer that Neil's faith began to mature. It's because of Tina's faith that they have the precious hope of seeing both Tina and Neil in the resurrection. I want to close with a poem that was read at their funeral. Neil had written it sometime in the last few weeks of Tina's life. To Tina's tumor. 7 years ago, you showed up in Tina's lovely brain. Ever since that time, she's never been the same. The doctors cut chemo to nuked you through and through. Tina's parents bought her every herb and brew they knew. Seemed you'd had enough, so you left to get a clue. The whole while Tina prayed, and her faith in God grew. Almost 4 years went by, but you couldn't stay away. Guess I can't blame you. She has that kind of sway. So you figured it out and came back for more. This time you were serious. Hoped to settle the score. So more surgery, a little chemo, and green juicing too. Radiation for kicks and protocell too. People kept praying. Well, Tina didn't worry. You're too stressed, she told me. Just give God all the glory. By George, you spread fast, and her oncologist did say, we're so sorry, dear Tina, do wish we had a way. Then you took her speech and her strength, and some of her dignity too, even made it hard to swallow, just to follow through. You've won this battle, but you're going to lose the war, since our sovereign God above has the power to restore. So it's time to say goodbye, as you finished her much too fast. You won't be able to come back, and her new life made everlast. As much as you pained, I'm very grateful to you, for my wife could be lost, and I could be too. So you helped humble her down into a sin-broken heap. God's hand was there, but he had to wait for her peep. She grabbed on, he pulled, with grace pouring forth. Cried, Lord, I'm a sinner, I don't have any worth. Hush now, child, and listen to me. I gave you my Son to die for thee. You were bought with his blood, the most precious of gifts. So believe in me now and leave the devil adrift. Lord, I thankfully accept, and I'll never flee. Thanks for using a sinful tumor to lead me to thee. Now the story doesn't stop, but continues to play on, and the lives touched by her beautiful song. I'm the one that was aided by her real life's testimony. God, I'm so grateful that you gave her to me. So let's press on and sing praises, so God surely knows that we appreciate his love, even in our woes.